Now that we've set the table a little bit with some of the DNS concepts, let's actually go ahead and install this server service. Now to do so, we'll follow many of the same procedures that we did when we installed DHCP. And just so you know, I'm not shooting this particular movie like most movies. It's not being shot in sequence necessarily. I try to do it in sequence where I can, but in this one, behind the scenes, I have removed DNS. I've also removed Active Directory services from this computer. It was an Active Directory domain controller, but I removed that stuff so we could get going and kind of build DNS from the ground up. Just so you know, so if you notice some things that may look a little bit different than before, that's exactly why it's the case. When you install the DNS server service, it's something that is certainly a necessary step. You don't have to do it for everyday working with a Server 2003 computer. It can be in a work group, and it can also be a member server in a domain, and you don't have to install the DNS server service on the computer. However, if you want to install Active Directory, which most Server 2003 computers will somehow participate in an Active Directory environment, so you have to have this consideration, then you need to install DNS. Now again, you don't have to install Server 2003's DNS, but it sure makes things generally a lot easier than if you use a third-party DNS solution. When you install DNS as a part of Active Directory setup, it also automates the creation of the forward lookup zones that are necessary, and it also automates the creation of those records. So we're going to configure DNS manually, but in a lot of circumstances, you might just include the installation of DNS as a part of Active Directory setup. And for information on Active Directory setup, this course doesn't really deal with Active Directory. That's more a topic that you would study in preparation for maybe the 294 exam. So the button pushing, how does it happen? It is installed through add remove Windows components. I say can install. This is certainly the way that I prefer, but you can also use the configure your server wizard, which you can locate under administrative tools, and then configure your server. You can launch this and do a variety of these types of installations, but again, for my purposes and for what you should probably know as an administrator, go through add remove Windows components in the control panel. Also, it's generally a good idea to make the DNS server a client of itself. Make the computer a DNS client, and that DNS client will be a client of the DNS server that you're installing. What do I mean exactly by that? What's the button pushing for that? Look at the properties of whatever connection you're configuring. And on the properties of TCP/IP, you want to make your DNS client, this is the DNS client, where you configure the DNS client, a client of itself. So you can enter in your own IP address, or you can also enter in this local address 127.0.0.1. That will have this computer check its own DNS server settings for name resolution before it goes out to possibly an alternate DNS server. So that's one way you can speed up processing and speed up name resolution. Well, let's look how to do this now. Install through add remove Windows components. Where is add remove Windows components? Same place it was before when we installed DHCP. In the control panel, add or remove programs, and then add or remove Windows components. Windows Setup will open up a dialog box to let you select components. We'll be looking once again at networking services. And it looks like the window wants to open. There it is. Windows components, we're going to go down to networking services, select, and then details. Remember, don't select this. It will install everything. The gray tells me that some of the services have been installed, but not all. DHCP has been installed, and again, if you were following along earlier, you may have noticed that was checked. Now I've uninstalled it, and I'm going to reinstall it. So select DNS, click on OK. You might be prompted for files, but you shouldn't be. And after the blue bar goes from left to right, DNS will be installed. Alright, when it's done, it will look like this. I was actually prompted for some files, so I had to go out and get them. I found them on the hard drive in the Windows System 32 DNS folder, and again, it will just depend on what files are being looked for, where they might be located. When you're done, click Finish. Setup finalizes here, and good thing about Server 2003 is that you do not need a restart. And now under Programs, Administrative Tools, you should have a new MMC Snap-in called DNS. I will now sort these by name to make them easier to find. DNS there. And this is the DNS snap-in, where we will now configure forward lookup zones, reverse lookup zones, and so on in the modules to come.